On a frigid February night in Cambridge, the air was sharp with winter's bite, swirling snowflakes dancing beneath the soft glow of streetlights like tiny, restless ghosts. Ava Watson, now a junior at Harvard, trudged through the quiet streets, her coat pulled tight against the relentless wind. She'd just emerged from an exhausting marathon of studying at Lamont Library, alongside her project partner, Daniel Pierce. The two had been locked in a relentless battle of wits, preparing for a moot court competition centered on the Fourth Amendment's sacred protections against unlawful searches and seizures. Hours had melted away as they pored over legal precedents, dissected court rulings, and sharpened their arguments until their minds buzzed with fatigue. Daniel had shuffled off to his dorm, his shoulders slumped with exhaustion, while Ava, ever the pragmatist, decided to swing by a 24-hour grocery store a few blocks away. Before heading back to her modest off-campus apartment in Cambridgeport, the old buildings of Cambridge stood like silent sentinels, their brick facades bathed in an almost reverent stillness under the snowy sky. The streets were hushed, the sidewalks nearly deserted, save for the occasional crunch of her boots against the frosty pavement. In her mind, Ava replayed the night's work probable cause versus reasonable suspicion, the weight of the exclusionary rule, the legacy of cases like Map v. Ohio that had reshaped the boundaries of justice. She hummed a faint tune to herself, a quiet rebellion against the cold that nipped at her fingertips, her breath puffing out in fleeting clouds. She felt safe here in this city she'd come to know so well, its rhythms familiar despite its urban sprawl. Inside the grocery store, the fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead as Ava moved with purpose, gathering the essentials: milk, eggs, bread, a handful of microwave dinners for those late nights buried in books. Her fingers brushed the cool plastic of the milk jug as she smiled warmly at the cashier, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes who returned a faint nod. Ava paid, tucked the bags under her arm, and stepped back into the night, bracing herself for the brisk 10-minute walk home. It was nearly midnight, but the streetlights cast a steady glow, illuminating her path through the snow-dusted streets. Then, out of the corner of her eye, she noticed a police car creeping along the road, its pace deliberate, almost predatory. A faint unease prickled at the back of her neck. She hadn't done anything wrong. Her life was a testament to discipline and determination, but the stories lingered in her mind, whispered by friends from back home, by classmates at other schools, tense run-ins with police, moments where innocence seemed to mean little. She shook it off, telling herself it was just a routine patrol, nothing more. The car would pass, and she'd be home soon, warming her hands over a mug of tea. But the car didn't pass. It sped up suddenly, tires crunching against the snow, and jerked to a stop beside her on the curb. A short, piercing wail from the siren jolted her, her heart lurching into her throat. "Stop right there. Put your bags down," a voice boomed through the loudspeaker, sharp and commanding. Ava froze, her mind racing, confusion crashing over her like a wave. She obeyed instinctively, lowering her grocery bags to the sidewalk with trembling hands, raising them slightly to show they were empty of threat. Her pulse hammered against her ribs, a frantic rhythm she couldn't quiet. Two officers stepped out of the car, their silhouettes stark against the swirling snow. The older one, Officer N. Flannery, was a towering figure, broad and heavy-set, his gray hair catching the light like frost. His face was etched with decades of hard-earned lines, a map of cynicism carved by years on the beat. The younger one, H. Sullivan, was leaner, his frame taut with a rookie's vigilance, his eyes darting over her like she was a puzzle to solve. "What's the problem, officer?" Ava asked, forcing her voice to stay steady, though it quivered at the edges. Flannery's gaze flicked to Sullivan, a silent exchange passing between them before he stepped forward, his hand hovering near his holster. "We got a report matching your description, woman in the area, possibly carrying a weapon," he said, his tone flat, almost bored, as if this were routine. Ava's eyes widened, disbelief surging through her. A weapon, to only have groceries. She stammered, gesturing to the bags at her feet, their contents spilling slightly onto the slushy pavement. Sullivan tilted his head, his voice cutting through the cold. "Where you coming from? What are you doing out this late?" She pointed again to the bags, her breath catching. I was studying at Lamont Library, then stopped for groceries. I'm just heading home to my apartment. Flannery's eyes narrowed, sweeping over her with a scrutiny that made her skin crawl. Mind if we search you? He asked, though it didn't sound like a question. Ava took a slow, deliberate breath, summoning the knowledge she'd spent months studying. Officers, I know my rights. I don't consent to a search without probable cause. Flannery's jaw tightened, a muscle twitching as his impatience flared. Sullivan stepped closer, his voice sharp. We don't need your permission if we've got probable cause. But you don't, Ava countered, her tone firm yet respectful, though her hands shook. I have no weapon. There's nothing suspicious about walking home with groceries. Flannery's patience snapped. I said we got a report matching your description. He barked, reaching for her arm. Panic surged through Ava, a cold, electric jolt that drowned out the wind. She'd always believed in the justice system, its promise of fairness, its potential for good if people fought to uphold it. But she also knew the stories, the ones that ended in handcuffs or worse, where power twisted into something ugly. Please, I'm a Harvard student, she said quickly, fumbling in her coat pocket for her ID, her fingers clumsy with nerves. My name's Ava Watson. This has to be a misunderstanding. Her words, meant to clarify, seemed to ignite something in Flannery. His lip curled, his voice dripping with disdain. So you're one of those fancy college girls who think you're above the law. Before she could respond, Sullivan lunged forward, seizing her wrists and twisting them behind her back. Pain flared through her shoulders, sharp and sudden, and she let out a small, involuntary cry, half shock, half fear. Her grocery bags toppled, eggs shattering against the pavement with a wet crunch, milk spilling in a slow, white river across the snow. You're hurting me, she gasped, her body rigid but unresisting. Are you resisting? Sullivan demanded, tightening his grip until she shook her head frantically. No. Cold metal bit into her wrists as handcuffs snapped shut. The sound echoing in the quiet night. Ava stood there, trembling, her breath hitching as her dignity unraveled thread by thread. Flannery knelt by her bags, poking through them with a sneer, as if expecting to unearth some hidden menace among the bread and cartons. Finding nothing, he straightened, his grimace deepening. Okay, Miss Harvard, let's see what the station has to say. Tears stung Ava's eyes, but she fought to keep her voice steady. I haven't done anything. This is wrong. I know my rights. Flannery ignored her, turning to mutter into his radio, while Sullivan gripped her elbow like she was a threat to be contained. A few late-night passers-by paused, their footsteps slowing as they gawked at the scene. Shame washed over Ava, hot and suffocating, mingling with a growing helplessness. She'd spent her life proving herself, thriving against isolation, pushing through late nights and subtle slights, but now, in this moment, she was powerless. Inside her chest, a storm brewed. She thought of her seminars, her tireless hours in Whittier Library's hallowed stacks, where the weight of history had felt like a promise. She thought of her op-ed in the Harvard Crimson, her voice rising for justice, for representation. She'd believed hard work could mend the system's flaws, that good conscience could triumph. But here, on this icy sidewalk, justice felt like a distant myth, and the abuse of power loomed largely a lesson carved into her skin as the cuffs bit deeper. The night stretched on, the snow falling heavier, as Ava stood caught between the ideals she'd championed and the stark reality unfolding before her. The frigid Cambridge air carried whispers of words like suspect, female, and complaint, each syllable slicing through the night and driving home the surreal nightmare unfolding before her. She wasn't a suspect, not in any rational, lawful sense of the word, yet there she stood, wrists bound by biting metal cuffs, her dignity stripped away on a frost-covered sidewalk. Her breath puffed out in shaky clouds as she tried to process the absurdity of it all. Moments later, Flanner strode back toward her, his heavy boots crunching against the ice. He exchanged a silent, knowing glance with Sullivan, a look that spoke volumes without a single word. Then, with a grip like iron, Flanner seized Ava's shoulder, steering her forcefully toward the idling patrol car. Her feet slipped on the slick pavement as she struggled to stay upright, her voice trembling as she begged, "Please, be careful." Her plea hung in the air, ignored. As the car door swung open, and she was shoved inside with no regard for her stumbling frame. The engine roared to life, and as the vehicle lurched forward, Ava's world tilted on its axis. She had always placed her faith in the law, in the triumph of reason over chaos, in the promise of justice. But now, with fear pulsing through her like a living thing, she realized how fragile those beliefs were when confronted by power in the hands of those who twisted it to their will. The ride to the station was a blur of icy streets and dim streetlights flashing past the window, each one a fleeting marker of the life she'd known slipping away. Inside the station, the fluorescent lights buzzed incessantly overhead, casting a sterile, unforgiving glow across the linoleum floors and chipped paint. Ava was marched down a narrow corridor, her sneakers squeaking faintly against the polished surface, until they reached a cramped interrogation room. The walls were a lifeless gray, the air stale and thick with the weight of countless stories like hers or worse. She tried to steady herself, to hold onto some shred of composure, but her wrists ached where the cuffs had dug into her skin, and her fingers tingled with numbness from the cold that still clung to her. Flanner and Sullivan positioned themselves like sentinels on either side of the scarred wooden table, arms folded, their stares boring into her as if she were some hardened felon. They'd finally nabbed after a long chase. Flanner dropped into a chair across from her, his voice cutting through the silence. "Let's make this simple. Who gave you the gun? And what were you planning to do with it?" Ava's eyes widened, her mind reeling in disbelief. "I don't know what you're talking about," she stammered, her voice cracking under the weight of her confusion. "I never had a goon. You searched me. I was buying groceries, milk, eggs, bread. You saw the receipts. You have everything." Sullivan let out a slow, exaggerated eye roll, his impatience palpable. "We got a solid tipsamione matching your description, was waving a weapon around. Near the grocery store," he said, his tone dripping with skepticism. Her stomach churned, a storm of fear and frustration brewing inside her. But she fought to keep her voice even. "That tip is wrong. I'm telling you, I'm a Harvard student. I was studying, then I went to the store. You found nothing on me. How can you even charge me with anything?" The officers traded a glance, a silent conversation passing between them. Flanner leaned forward, his fingers interlocking with a casual menace. "We can hold you while we verify who you are, check for warrants, finish the paperwork. If our witness sticks to their story, we've got probable cause to move forward." Ava's heart hammered against her ribcage, each beat echoing the insanity of the moment. "This is crazy," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I don't have a record. You've never even had a parking ticket. You're making a mistake. Please, just let me call some of me friends, my family. One phone call, that's all I'm asking." Sullivan reached for the phone on the table, but instead of handing it to her, he slid it just beyond her grasp, a smirk tugging at his lips. "You'll get your call when we say so. For now, we need your statement, and I'd think real hard about lying if I were you." Anger flared in her chest, hot and sharp, fueled by memories of her constitutional law lecturer's Miranda rights, the right to an attorney, the right to silence. She knew she could clam up, demand a lawyer, but she also understood the urgency of clearing her name. Taking a deep, shuddering breath, she laid out her evening in meticulous detail, wrapping up a late-night study session in the library, trudging through the snow to the corner store, picking out groceries with chilled hands, then spotting the patrol car as she stepped outside. She described the search, the officers rifling through her bag, finding nothing but a carton of milk and a loaf of bread. Her voice grew steadier as she spoke, but their faces remained impassive. Flanner scribbled notes, his pen scratching across the pad, occasionally flicking his cold, calculating eyes up to meet hers with a smirk that chilled her to the bone. Sullivan, meanwhile, leaned back, tapping his foot in a restless rhythm, his head shaking as if her words were a tiresome fairy tale. When she finished, she looked at them, her chest tight with hope for some flicker of reason. Instead, Flanner stood abruptly, stretching his arms overhead with a grunt. "All right, wait here," he said curtly, and with that, he and Sullivan strode out, the door slamming shut with a resounding clang that echoed in the tiny room. Alone now, the silence pressed in around her, suffocating and heavy. Ava's feet tapped nervously against the worn linoleum. the room's stifling warmth a stark contrast to the biting cold she'd endured outside. She wanted to scream, to pound on the walls, to demand a lawyer and her freedom. But fear coiled around her like a vice, holding her still. She'd never been arrested, never even been in a police station beyond the hypothetical scenarios of her textbooks and mock trials. Time stretched on, each minute bleeding into the next, until an hour had passed in agonizing stillness. Then the door swung open again, and a new figure stepped in city, a woman this time, her face etched with a stern gravity that made Ava's stomach drop. "I'm Officer Torres," she announced. Her voice clipped as she switched on a recorder and set it between them. "I'll be handling your intake. We've got a witness claiming you threatened them with a firearm near the grocery store tonight. Are you aware of this complaint?" Ava's jaw fell slack, her mind scrambling to keep up. "Threaten them? That's impossible. I didn't threaten anyone. I didn't even talk to anyone while I was out." Torres nodded stiffly, her expression unyielding, as if she'd heard such denials 1,000 times before. "You'll be formally charged with illegal possession of a firearm and making criminal threats. You'll see a judge in the morning." The words hit Ava like a physical blow, her stomach twisting into painful knots as her thoughts spun wildly. "But I'm innocent. You have no evidence. There's no gun. Why won't anyone listen to me?" Torres slid a file across the table, her movements methodical. "We've got a civilian statement. Says you confronted him in the parking lot, pulled a gun, and threatened him. Description matches you. Short black hair, about 5'6", dark coat, carrying a store bag. Sounds pretty spot on." Tears prickled at the corners of Ava's eyes, her voice rising in desperation. "That could be 1,000 people. It's not true. This is unbelievable." Torres shrugged, her shoulders lifting in a gesture of indifference. "I just handle the intake. Take it up with your public defender. Sign here." She pushed a form toward Ava, who stared down at it through a haze of disbelief, a document cementing her arrest, her new identity as a criminal. Her hand shook as she scrawled her name, every fiber of her being screaming for a lawyer, for someone to pull her out of this spiraling nightmare. But she was alone, trapped in a system that had already judged her guilty. What followed was a fog of procedure and humiliation. They led her to a holding cell, a bleak, claustrophobic box with a single hard bench bolted to the wall. The overhead light hummed relentlessly, casting a dull glow over the scuffed concrete. She was fingerprinted, her hands pressed against the cold glass of the scanner. Her mugshot snapped as tears of rage and shame welled up in her eyes. She tried calling her parents, her fingers fumbling with the phone. But the line rang unanswered. Too late at night. They were probably asleep. Her voice broke as she left a message. "Mom, Dad, I've been wrongfully arrested. I need help. Call me as soon as you get this." Then she dialed her roommate, Sonali, who picked up in a groggy panic. "Oh my God, Ava, are you okay?" "What do we do?" "I'm not okay," Ava choked out, her composure crumbling. "I need a lawyer. Can you tell Harvard Student Services? Maybe they can help with bail." Or a guard barked at her to wrap it up, and she whispered a frantic "please help" before the call cut off. Escorted back to the cell, the door clanged shut behind her, and Ava sank onto the bench, wrapping her arms around herself against the creeping chill. Anxiety clawed at her chest, her mind racing with the consequences of this false accusation. Harvard had a zero-tolerance policy for criminal charges. Her dreams of law school, of a career in public service, everything she'd poured her soul into, could unravel in an instant. Even if she fought this, the stain of suspicion would linger. Questions swirled in her head, relentless and unanswered. Who was this witness? Why would they lie about a gun? Was it a random mistake? Or something darker, a targeted setup fueled by prejudice? As a black woman, she couldn't help but wonder if her very existence had triggered someone's warped sense of threat, turning a mundane grocery run into a twisted tale of fear and retribution. Or was there more, a hidden agenda, a deliberate strike against her? Exhaustion finally overtook her, and she curled up on the bench, hugging herself tightly. She tried to summon visions of hope, her graduation, her family's proud smiles, the bright future she'd mapped out, but they dissolved into the gray despair of her cell. Silent tears traced paths down her cheeks, her heart thudding with dread for the morning ahead. When dawn broke, Ava stood in a beige jumpsuit before a stern-faced judge in Cambridge District Court. her insides hollowed out by a night of restless dread. The prosecutor's voice rang out, cold and mechanical, listing the charges: illegal firearm possession, criminal threats. Each word was a hammer blow, driving home the lesson that justice could be a brittle illusion, easily shattered by those who abused their authority. Flanner and Sullivan had wielded their power like a weapon. Torres had processed her fate with detached efficiency, and now the system churned forward. Indifferent to her truth, Ava's story wasn't just a personal tragedy, it was a stark warning of how swiftly power, unchecked, could corrupt fairness, leaving innocents to fight alone in its shadow. Each accusation struck Ava like a brutal blow to the stomach: possession of a firearm, brandishing it in public, making terroristic threats, disturbing the peace. The words echoed in her mind, heavy and unrelenting, as she stood in the dimly lit courtroom, her knees trembling beneath her. Her public defender, a weary man with sunken eyes and a rumpled suit, shuffled papers nervously. He was drowning in cases, his desk likely buried under files of other desperate souls, and Ava could feel his exhaustion radiating off him. He muttered something about the lack of evidence, just one shaky witness statement, but his voice lacked conviction, as if he'd already resigned himself to the outcome. The judge, an older woman with graying hair pulled tight into a bun, barely lifted her gaze from the file before her. With a flick of her wrist and a curt tone, she set bail at a sum that made Ava's heart sink, a number so far beyond her reach. It might as well have been $1 million. Shock rippled through her, her legs nearly giving out as the gavel slammed down, a sharp, metallic clang that reverberated through the room and sealed her fate. Tears pricked her eyes as the bailiffs, their faces blank and unyielding, gripped her arms and steered her toward a side door. As they shuffled her out, Ava caught a fleeting glimpse of Sonali and Daniel in the back of the courtroom. Her best friends sat rigid, their wide eyes glistening with disbelief, hands pressed over their mouths as if stifling gasps. Sonali's dark hair fell messily over her face, and Daniel's jaw was clenched so tight Ava could see the strain from across the room. She managed to mouth "help me" through the lump in her throat, a silent plea as the bailiffs shoved her forward. That night, confined to a stark holding cell with its peeling paint and the faint smell of bleach, Ava sat on a cold metal bench, her mind a whirlwind of fear and fury. The injustice gnawed at her. Insides hadn't done anything wrong, yet here she was, trapped by a system that seemed hell-bent on breaking her. She hugged her knees to her chest, tears spilling silently down her cheeks, unaware that the worst was still lurking on the horizon, orchestrated by forces she couldn't yet comprehend. Forces that twisted truth into lies, poised to grind her down beneath the merciless gears of a justice system riddled with flaws. By the next afternoon, whispers of Ava's arrest had ignited across campus like wildfire. Social media erupted, hashtags like Friva Watson and Justice for Ava trending as students tapped furiously at their screens. Friends, classmates, even a handful of professors joined the chorus, their posts dripping with outrage. They accused the Cambridge police of racial profiling, of snatching an innocent black woman in a blatant abuse of power. Outside the police station, a small but fierce group of protesters gathered under the overcast sky, their breath visible in the chilly March air. They hoisted signs scrawled with bold demands: "Stop criminalizing black women." And Harvard stands with Ava, their voices rising in chants that echoed off the brick walls. Local news vans rolled up, cameras capturing the swelling unrest, lenses glinting in the weak sunlight as reporters scribbled notes. In the thick of it all, Ava's roommates, Sonali and Amelia, became her fiercest advocates. Sonali, with her sharp wit and relentless drive, leaned on her ties to the Harvard Crimson. She stormed into the newspaper's cluttered office, her voice steady but urgent as she pleaded with the editors to dig into Ava's case. She painted a vivid picture of her friend's character: Ava, the quiet sophomore who loved late-night study sessions and cheesy rom-coms, not some gun-waving menace. Meanwhile, Amelia, soft-spoken but steely, marched to the Harvard Office of Student Services, her blonde hair tied back in a tight ponytail as she demanded the university step in. The administration's response was maddeningly cautious, a bland statement about supporting a fair, legal process that left a bitter taste in everyone's mouth. Students grumbled in the dining halls and lecture rooms, pointing out the glaring double standard. If Ava were a star quarterback, or the daughter of a wealthy alum, the university would have roared into action, not tiptoed around the edges. Still, the groundswell of support bore fruit. Friends, faculty, even strangers moved by the story chipped in donations, their small pledges stacking up like bricks in a wall of solidarity. After 3 endless days, 72 hours of flickering fluorescent lights, lumpy cots, and the distant clang of Celle d'Ursava walked free. She stepped out of the station into a blinding burst of sunlight, squinting as a swarm of cameras thrust toward her. Her braids hung loose, framing a face etched with exhaustion and a flicker of shame she couldn't shake. Daniel waited at the bottom of the steps, his broad shoulders hunched under a gray coat he'd brought for her. Without a word, he draped it over her trembling frame and guided her through the chaos. His arm a steady anchor. No comment, he barked, his voice sharp as a reporter shoved a microphone too close. They slipped into a taxi idling around the corner, and Ava sank into the cracked leather seat, her body folding in on itself. She hadn't slept, hadn't eaten much beyond stale jail sandwiches. Gratitude warred with humiliation in her chest, but beneath it all burned a fierce, unyielding anger at the system that had dragged her through this nightmare. In the days that followed, Ava's cramped off-campus apartment morphed into a makeshift command center. Books and half-empty coffee mugs cluttered the table as Daniel, Sonali, and Amelia pored over every scrap of her rest record. Daniel, ever the pragmatist, scribbled timelines on a legal pad, his brow furrowed in concentration. Sonali paced, her phone buzzing with updates from the Crimson, while Amelia cross-referenced police reports with a quiet intensity. Ava's public defender, Jeff Harding, stopped by Anzi, a weary man in his 40s with a mop of unkempt brown hair and a tie that never sat straight. He carried the weight of too many cases in his slumped posture, but his eyes softened when he looked at Ava. "I'll do what I can," he promised, though his tone betrayed the limits of his bandwidth. Ava nodded, but deep down, she knew what I can wouldn't cut it. She needed more than a sympathetic shrug, she needed a warrior. Her parents, frantic from their home to states away, scoured Boston for a private attorney. After countless calls, they stumbled on a gem, a small legal clinic run by Quinn Johnson, a Harvard law alum with a reputation for dismantling police misconduct cases. Quinn was a lean man in his late 30s, with a close-cropped beard and a quiet fire in his dark eyes. His office downtown was modest faded wallpaper, a desk piled with files, but it thrummed with purpose. He'd won battles against unconstitutional arrests and excessive force, and when he heard Ava's story, something flickered in his gaze. "I won't let an innocent young woman's life get derailed by this," he said, his voice low but resolute. Despite his usual fees, he slashed his rate, moved by the raw unfairness of it all. "I've seen too many cases built on sandflimsy statements, biased cops. There's a story here, and we're going to uncover it." Together, Ava and Quinn became a relentless team. They hunted down security footage from the grocery store where the alleged incident occurred, a fluorescent-lit corner shop with sticky floors and buzzing coolers. The manager, a middle-aged guy with a thick Boston accent and a Red Sox cap, handed over the tapes without hesitation. On Quinn's laptop, the grainy video played, Ava strolling in at 11:40 p.m., grabbing a carton of milk and a bag of chips, then heading out. No tension, no confrontation. She looked like any other tired college kid. Her hoodie slouched over her shoulders as she checked her phone. "This is gold," Quinn said, a triumphant grin breaking across his face as he tapped the screen. No altercation inside, but the parking lot, that's where they say it happened. Their excitement dimmed when they reviewed the outdoor footage. The store's ancient cameras barely caught the lot, and the one angle that mattered was blocked by a dumpster. Ava appeared for a fleeting moment, calm, unhurried before vanishing from view. It wasn't airtight, but it chipped away at the prosecution's tale of a menacing threat. The prosecution clung to their star witness, Greg Norris, a balding man in his 50s with a nervous tic and a story that didn't quite add up. He claimed Ava had waved a handgun in the parking lot, snarling threats of retribution under the sodium glow of the streetlights. He'd bolted to his car, dialed 911, and watched her leave, feeding the dispatcher a description that led police straight to Ava blocks away. "He's lying," Ava snapped, her voice trembling with rage as she read his statement in Quinn's office. "I've never seen this guy in my life." Quinn leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled, his expression grave. "I believe you, but we need proof he's full of it." Weeks dragged on as Quinn filed motion after motion, pushing for dismissal. The court set a preliminary hearing, and the Cambridge police dug in their heels, citing Norris's call and Ava's suspicious demeanor when they'd cornered her. Meanwhile, Ava's life unraveled. Midterms loomed at Harvard, but her textbooks sat unopened, her mind replaying the snap of cuffs and the judge's indifferent stare. Nightmares jolted her awake, her wrists aching with phantom pressure. In the cafeteria, she felt eyes on her, some curious, some accusing. Though her supporters rallied hard, their flyers and chance a lifeline she clung to. Then, one gray Wednesday afternoon, a call shifted everything. Ava sat across from Quinn, sifting through defense notes, when the receptionist's voice crackled over the intercom. "A man's on the line about Miss Watson's case. Says he's got information." Quinn's eyes met hers, sharp and alert, and he reached for the phone. The phone rang with an insistent chime, cutting through the quiet hum of Ava's apartment. She hesitated, her fingers hovering over the receiver, a ripple of unease tightening her chest. Finally, she picked it up, her voice tentative as she murmured, "Hello, this is Ava." On the other end, a gravelly male voice rasped through the line, low and urgent. "I know you got set up. That Greg Norris guy's lying through his teeth, and I've got the proof to back it up. But I need protection. He's not working alone. There's some kind of deal cooked up with those cops who hauled you in." Ava's breath caught in her throat, a sharp hitch that made her head spin. She fumbled to hit the speaker button, her hands trembling as she glanced at Quinn, her friend and confidant, who sat across the room, his brow furrowing with concern. "Who is this?" she asked, her voice quivering like a taut string about to snap. "I can't tell you that," the voice whispered, barely audible, as if the speaker feared the walls themselves might overhear. "All I can say is this mess runs deeper than you could ever imagine. The police got a tip-off, but it wasn't some random call. Norris was pushed into this, and there's money changing hands. I've seen things that make me a target. I'm not safe. I'll call again." The line went dead with a hollow click, leaving an oppressive silence in its wake. Ava's wide eyes locked onto Quinn's, her pulse pounding so fiercely she could feel it in her fingertips. Quinn's lips pressed into a thin line, his mind already racing. "This could be some crank pulling a sick joke," he said slowly. "Or it might just be someone who's stumbled onto a cesspool of police corruption and has the evidence to prove it." Ava swallowed hard, her throat dry as sandpaper. "Corruption? You really think that's possible?" Quinn leaned back, his frown deepening as he rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "Cops bending the rules is one thing, but stuff happens all the time. But planting a fake witness? That's a whole different beast. If this guy's telling the truth, it could rip this case wide open, expose something rotten at the core." The weight of his words settled over them like a storm cloud. They decided to record every detail of the call, scribbling notes on a legal pad as the mysterious words echoed in their minds. Quinn wasted no time, dialing up his network of legal contacts, digging for any whispers of trouble brewing within the Cambridge Police Department. To his astonishment, faint rumors surfaced said nothing solid, just hushed talk of federal investigations sniffing around the area. No one could confirm it, but the mere suggestion sent a jolt through him. Could Ava's arrest be a thread in a larger tapestry of deceit? Maybe some officers were padding their arrest records with fabricated busts, or worse, pinning blame on innocent people like Ava to cover up a departmental disaster. The thought gnawed at him, fueling his resolve. As the preliminary hearing drew near, the air grew thick with tension and restless speculation. Ava felt a spark of determination ignite within her, fanned by the possibility that the truth might finally break free. For the first time since the handcuffs had clicked round her wrists, a fragile hope flickered in her chest, a chance at redemption, a way to clear her name. Little did she know, her fight was about to catch the eye of an unexpected ally, someone with the clout to shift the entire battlefield in her favor. The morning of the hearing arrived, cloaked in the sharp chill of late winter. Ava jolted awake before the sun breached the horizon, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She dressed with care, slipping into a charcoal gray suit that hugged her frame, paired with a simple blouse that spoke of quiet dignity. Standing before the mirror, she studied her reflection, the shadows pooling beneath her eyes, the faint tremor in her jaw. Fatigue and fear stared back at her, but she squared her shoulders, whispering to herself, "You're innocent. You've got nothing to hide." Yet the fear lingered, a persistent shadow gnawing at her resolve, whispering doubts she couldn't silence. At the courthouse, Quinn guided her through the labyrinth of corridors, his steady presence a lifeline amid the chaos. Reporters swarmed the halls like vultures, their cameras flashing, their voices clamoring for a soundbite from the Harvard student thrust into this nightmare. Onlookers craned their necks, eager for a glimpse of the drama unfolding. The tension hung heavy, a palpable force pressing against Ava's chest. Behind a roped-off section, her friends Sally, Daniel, and Amelia stood in solidarity, their faces etched with worry and unwavering support. Sally, with her warm brown eyes, offered a nod of encouragement. Daniel's restless energy showed in the way he shifted from foot to foot, and Amelia, ever the quiet strength, clasped her hands tightly, as if willing Ava to feel her resolve. Ava managed a faint smile in their direction, a small anchor in the storm. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere shifted to something sterner, more foreboding. Judge Marianne Flores presided, her sharp gaze cutting through the room like a blade. Known for her no-nonsense demeanor, she commanded respect with every measured word. The prosecutor, Todd Walters, a weary man with a predator's confidence, arranged his files with meticulous care, his thin lips curling into a self-assured smirk. Officers Flanner and Sullivan sat nearby, their uniforms crisp, their expressions unshaken, despite the whispers of misconduct swirling around them. In the gallery, Greg Norris lounged in the front row, his presence a thorn in Ava's side. Each time his eyes flicked toward her, a smug grin tugged at his mouth, as if he relished her discomfort. She clenched her fists beneath the table, her nails digging into her palms as fury simmered beneath her skin. The hearing began with Walters laying out the prosecution's case, his voice smooth and rehearsed. He painted a vivid picture, an unidentified gun, a menacing threat, a frantic 911 call, and a description that pinned Ava as the culprit. He introduced Norris as the star witness, the linchpin of their story. Ava's stomach churned as Norris took the stand, his hand resting casually on the Bible as he swore to tell the truth. In a flat, mechanical tone, he spun his tale. He'd been in the parking lot when Ava approached him, her coat parting to reveal a hidden firearm. She'd hissed something about payback, he claimed, her words dripping with menace. He'd feared for his life, he said, fumbling for his phone to call for help the moment she turned away. Ava's outrage boiled over, a white-hot surge that threatened to spill out. But Quinn's hand settled on her arm, a gentle pressure urging her to stay calm, to trust him. When it was Quinn's turn to cross-examine, he moved with the precision of a surgeon, his voice steady but laced with intent. "You say Miss Watson confronted you after buying her groceries," he began, letting the words linger in the air. "But the security footage from the store shows her leaving at 11:47 p.m., with no sign of her speaking to anyone, certainly no threats. How do you explain that?" Norris shifted in his seat, his eyes darting away from Quinn's piercing stare. "The camera doesn't cover the parking lot," he muttered, his voice faltering. "It happened out there, not inside. You can't see everything on those tapes." Quinn pressed harder, his tone sharpening. "Were there any other witnesses out there? Did you shout for help? Did anyone see you looking scared?" Norris licked his lips, a nervous tic betraying his composure. "It had all went down so fast. No one else was around. I just got in my car and drove off." Quinn leaned in, his voice dropping to a lethal calm. "So, we're left with just your word, no gun, no evidence, no corroboration. The footage contradicts you, Mr. Norris. Are you absolutely sure you're not mistaken?" A flicker of panic danced across Norris's face, but he doubled down, his jaw tightening. "I'm not mistaken. She did it, I'm sure." The judge called a recess for lunch, promising to reconvene later to hear Quinn's motion to dismiss. Ava felt a fragile thread of hope weaved through her furnace's story was flimsy, and Quinn had dismantled it with surgical precision. But she knew the bar to proceed to trial was low at this stage. They weren't safe yet. In the courthouse cafeteria, she and Quinn sat hunched over lukewarm coffee, the weight of the morning pressing down on them. Suddenly, Daniel burst in, his eyes alight with excitement. "Ava, Quinn, you won't believe this. I just saw the guys in suits corner Flanner and Sullivan in the hallway. They looked like Feds, maybe FBI or something." Ava's heart lurched, a wild leap of adrenaline. "Feds? Are you sure?" Daniel nodded vigorously. "They flashed badges, said something about the U.S. Marshals Service. Told the officers to come with them." It looked intense. Quinn's eyebrow arched, a spark of intrigue in his gaze. "U.S. Marshals, that's a twist. We need to find out what's happening." They hurried back to the courtroom area, where a quiet buzz of commotion pulsed near a side corridor. There, two imposing figures in dark suits, badges glinting on chains round their necks, were ushering Flanner and Sullivan away. Flanner's face was a mask of confusion, his brow furrowed as he muttered something to his partner. Sullivan, meanwhile, looked ashen, his usual bravado drained away, leaving him hollow. Quinn stepped forward, his voice firm but cautious. "Hold Onium, Miss Watson's attorney. Is there something we should know?" The older marshal, a broad-shouldered man with a buzz cut and a no-nonsense air, sized Quinn up. "Mr. Johnson, right? I'm Deputy Marshal Trent Davis. We're investigating certain officers for potential corruption. We need to speak with these two. We'll be in touch with you as well." With that, they vanished down the hall, leaving Ava reeling. Her mind raced back to the raspy voice on the phone. Could this be the proof he'd hinted at? The timing was too perfect, too uncanny to dismiss. When court resumed, Flanner and Sullivan's absence cast a shadow over the proceedings. Walters tried to soldier on, but Quinn pounced, his voice ringing with authority. "Your Honor, the arresting officers have suddenly disappeared, escorted out by federal marshals. No less. We deserve to know what's going on here." Judge Flores's stern expression tightened, her patience visibly thinning. "Their absence is certainly unusual," she conceded. Walters, flustered and grasping, argued that Norris's testimony alone should suffice. But the judge wasn't swayed. She scheduled a new hearing date, ordering the prosecution to clarify the officer's status. Until then, Ava's fate hung in limbo, suspended between dread and a burgeoning hope. Outside, reporters swarmed like bees, their questions a relentless barrage. Quinn raised his voice above the din, his tone resolute. "My client is innocent, and today's events suggest there's far more to this story than we've been told. We'll keep fighting until the truth comes out." As the crowd pressed in, Ava felt the weight of their stares, but also the strength of those beside her. Quinn, her friends, and now, perhaps, an unseen ally in the shadows, ready to tip the scales of justice in her favor. The lesson was clear: power, when abused, breeds corruption. But the consequences of such betrayal can unravel even the tightest schemes, exposing the guilty and lifting the innocent toward the light. Ava Watson had always insisted she was innocent, her voice steady and unwavering from the moment the handcuffs clicked around her wrists. She felt the cold metal bite into her skin that night outside the grocery store, her heart pounding with disbelief as officers Flanner and Sullivan barked orders at her, their faces hard and unyielding. Her legal team, led by the sharp-minded Quinn, clung to a growing suspicion that the officers hadn't just made a mistake, they'd crossed a line. With every ounce of determination, they vowed to chase down every possible lead, to pry open every shadowed corner, until justice was no longer a distant hope but a tangible reality. What gnawed at everyone, though, was the sudden presence of the U.S. Marshals in a case that seemed, at first, like a routine arrest gone wrong. Why them? Why now? In the days that followed, whispers began to seep through the cracks of the Cambridge Police Department, like water through a crumbling dam. Rumors swirled in dimly lit bars and hushed conversations on street corners. Flanner and Sullivan weren't just careless cops, they might be tangled in something much darker. Word spread that they'd been linked to a sprawling investigation, one that painted a grim picture of falsified reports and evidence planted like seeds in a garden of lies. Some said there were secret deals, handshake agreements between certain officers and low-level crooks, cash exchanging hands to clean up the streets by pinning crimes on people who fit a convenient mold. If this was true, Ava's arrest wasn't a fluke. It could have been a calculated move. Her name scribbled on a list to pad arrest quotas or to bury some other sin. Under the weight of her supposed guilt, the thought made her stomach churn, a mix of dread and fury simmering beneath her calm exterior. That week, federal vehicles leak. Black SUVs with tinted windows strolled up outside the Cambridge PD more than once, their presence impossible to ignore. The local papers pounced, splashing bold headlines across their front pages: "Corruption in Cambridge PD," and "Harvard students' case sparks federal probe." City officials stumbled over themselves, issuing hurried statements about cooperating fully with the Marshals and launching an internal review, their words dripping with forced sincerity. Amid the chaos, Quinn's phone buzzed with a call from Deputy Marshal Trent Davis, a man whose voice carried the weight of authority tempered by a quiet resolve. He wanted a private meeting about Ava's arrest, no fanfare, just answers. Ava and Quinn arrived at a nondescript federal building in downtown Boston, its gray facade blending into the overcast sky. Security was tight, metal detectors hummed, guards eyed them with practiced suspicion, and their footsteps echoed on the polished floor as they were ushered into a stark conference room. A wall of frosted glass loomed behind a metal table where Davis sat, flipping through a thick folder, his brow furrowed in concentration. "Thank you for coming," he said, offering a polite nod to Ava and Quinn as they settled into stiff chairs. "Miss Watson, we've been watching your case closely. We don't think your arrest was a one-off mistake. We believe it's part of a pattern corruption that runs deeper than you might imagine." Ava's throat tightened, her breath catching as his words sank in, framed. The idea hit her like a punch, and she wasn't sure whether to scream or cry. Davis leaned forward, his gaze steady. "Flanner and Sullivan have been on our radar for months, ever since internal complaints started piling up. We think they've been working with paid informants or strong-arming civilians to cook up charges against people they figured wouldn't push back. People without money, without connections, people the system's already primed to doubt." Ava's hands clenched into fists under the table, her nails digging into her palms. Anger surged through her, hot and sharp, but it mingled with a strange relief. She wasn't crazy, wasn't alone in this nightmare. Her voice trembled as she spoke. "So I was just a target. I don't know if I'm glad to hear that or ready to tear something apart. How many others have they ruined?" Quinn's jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing as he cut in. "What about Greg Norris, the so-called witness? Where does he fit in?" Davis slid a page from his folder across the table, revealing a grainy photo of Norris, a weary man with sunken eyes and a nervous smirk. "Norris is a known informant, a regular for Sullivan. We've tracked payments to him, cash funneled through an off-the-books account. Nothing ties him directly to your case yet, but we're almost certain he was paid or pressured." Point the finger at Miss Watson. Ava's breath hitched, her mind racing back to that night, the flickering streetlights, the grocery bag slipping from her hands, the shrill wail of sirens. Norris had been there, lurking in the shadows, his 911 call the spark that lit this fire. "So what happens now?" she asked, her voice steadier than she felt. Davis paused, weighing his words. "We need your help, Miss Watson. We're building a casse conspiracy. Civil rights violations under color of law. Your arrest is a cornerstone. If you're willing, your testimony, your evidence, could help us nail them. In return, we'll do everything we can to clear your name. And if you want to push further, a civil rights lawsuit could mean compensation for what they've put you through." Ava exhaled slowly, the air escaping her lungs like a weight lifting. She'd never pictured herself here, at the heart of a fight this big. Quinn glanced at her, his expression cautious but hopeful. "We appreciate your honesty, Deputy Marshal. Our goal is getting Ava free and seeing justice done. We'll work with you, but we expect full transparency." Davis nodded gravely. "You'll have it, but brace yourself, issues could get ugly. Flanner and Sullivan might not be lone wolves. There could be supervisors, city officials, a whole network trying to keep this buried." Ava straightened in her chair, her shoulders squaring as resolve hardened within her. "I don't care who they are or how high they climb. I want the truth out there. No one else should suffer like this." They agreed to collaborate, sharing evidence and planning over the next few weeks as the investigation deepened. Meanwhile, the local media caught the scent of a bigger story. Federal agents were digging into multiple officers, and Ava's case was just one thread in a tangled web. Pressure built on the district attorney's office, cracks forming in their flimsy case against her. Then Norris disappeared, skipped town, some said, leaving no trace. Without him, the prosecution's story crumbled like dry sand. Phone records sealed the deal. Calls between Sullivan and Norris that night, timed perfectly with Ava's exit from the store. The DA's office had no choice. They dropped the charges. Their statement a bland formality that belied the triumph it represented. Ava was free. The day the news broke, Ava stood outside the courthouse, flanked by Quinn, her friend Daniel, and classmates Sonali and Amelia. Cameras flashed like lightning, reporters shouting over one another as she stepped to a microphone. She took a deep breath, the crisp March air filling her lungs, and spoke. "I'm so grateful to everyone who stood by me, who believed me when I said I didn't do this. The system failed a lot of people, but the U.S. Marshals helped uncover the truth. I'm not stopping here. I want to fight for change, for a system that doesn't let this happen again." Her voice rang with conviction, her relief shadowed by a fierce determination. She wasn't a suspect anymore, wasn't a name on a charge sheet. But as she stepped away, she knew the real battle for accountability, for justice, was only beginning. Back at Harvard, Ava was welcomed with open arms. Classmates hugged her tightly, their faces a mix of joy and outrage at what she'd endured. Professors stopped her in the halls, offering quiet words of support. The campus buzzed with debates about profiling, civil rights, and police accountability. Sparked by her ordeal, the Black Students Association invited her to speak at a panel, and though her hands shook as she gripped the podium, she poured out her story, the humiliation of the arrest, the fear, the betrayal. Her voice broke at times, but her resolve never wavered. Still, normalcy eluded her. Deputy Marshal Davis called often, updating her on the investigation, while Quinn filed a civil rights suit against Flanner, Sullivan, and the Cambridge PD, demanding not just money, but reforms to prevent this nightmare from repeating. The Marshals tightened their grip on the rogue officers. Flanner and Sullivan were suspended, their lives unraveling as investigators uncovered forged reports, doctored evidence, and bank accounts swollen with mysterious deposits. Text messages surfaced, cryptic exchanges with petty criminals like Norris, hinting at a scheme years in the making. The evidence piled up, undeniable and damning, until federal indictments landed. Conspiracy, civil rights violations, a litany of charges that could lock them away for decades. Court filings revealed a chilling truth. The officers had preyed on the vulnerableness people. Addicts, small-time offenders, forcing or bribing them to lie, targeting minorities, and the powerless to inflate their stats or shield their own crimes. It was a lesson in justice twisted, power abused, and the wreckage left behind. For Ava, it was more than vindication. It was a call to action, a reminder that unchecked authority could shatter lives, but that truth, fought for, could mend them too. The air in Cambridge hung heavy with tension that year, a city caught in the grip of its own unraveling secrets. Anyone who dared to challenge the Cambridge Police Department, or worse, bet those who did found themselves teetering on a precipice. They risked being ensnared in a web of fabricated charges or hounded relentlessly, until their lives frayed at the edges. For Ava Watson, a young black woman navigating her final year at Harvard, this wasn't an abstract threat, it was a chilling reality that had crashed into her life. One frigid February night, handcuffs bit into her wrists as groceries tumbled from her bags, eggs cracking against the icy sidewalk, their yolks bleeding into the snow. Her heart pounded with a mix of fear and disbelief as officers Flannery and Sullivan loomed over her, their faces cold and unyielding, their authority unquestionable. Now, Quinn Johnson, a tenacious civil rights attorney with a reputation for dismantling lies, uncovered the piece of evidence that would turn the tide, a damning record of misconduct, buried deep within the department's own files. It was the smoking gun he'd been searching for, the linchpin of Ava's civil case. He sat in his cluttered office late into the night, poring over documents, his brow furrowed with determination. For him, this wasn't just a case, it was a reckoning. When those revelations exploded into the public sphere, the media seized the story with fervor. Headlines screamed of corruption, and the court of public opinion delivered a swift, merciless verdict against the police department. The city's residents, once ambivalent, now gathered in coffee shops and living rooms, their voices rising in outrage as they pieced together the scope of the injustice. City Hall became a hive of frantic activity. Officials darted through marble corridors, their polished shoes clicking against the floor, as they scrambled to staunch the bleeding of their reputation. The police chief, a man whose stern demeanor had long commanded respect, felt the weight of scrutiny bearing down on him. Under a barrage of pressure-phone calls from furious constituents, blistering editorials, protesters chanting outside his window tendered his resignation, his hands trembling as he signed the letter. The mayor, a weary figure with a penchant for grand promises, stepped into the spotlight, vowing a sweeping transformation of police practices. Mandatory body cameras would capture every interaction, he declared, and independent oversight boards would hold officers accountable. His words rang through a packed press conference, but for Ava, who watched from her dorm room, they felt like the first fragile notes of a justice long deferred justice. Her suffering had set into motion. The civil suit marched forward, a grueling procession of depositions that dragged Ava back into the darkest corners of her memory. She sat in a sterile conference room, the hum of fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, recounting the humiliation of her arrest barked orders, the rough hands shoving her against a patrol car, the stares of passers-by who saw only a criminal. Each word she spoke clawed at her insides. But this time, she wasn't alone. Her legal team flanked her, their presence a quiet bulwark against the pain, and Quinn's steady gaze reminded her she was fighting for something bigger than herself. She was carving her name into history, a testament to resilience in the face of tyranny. Quinn, relentless and unyielding, tore into the department's defense attorneys with surgical precision. He presented reams of evidence, sentinel memos, witness statements, audio recordings, each piece a brick in the wall of corruption he was dismantling. Witnesses took the stand, their voices trembling yet resolute, detailing Flannery and Sullivan's reign of terror, threats whispered in back alleys, evidence planted in desperate haste, lives upended by their unchecked power. The courtroom became a theater of consequence, and the city attorneys soon realized the tide was turning against them. Late one evening, they approached Quinn in a dimly lit hallway, their faces etched with exhaustion. They offered a settlement, a substantial sum that would secure Ava's future, a chance to bury the case before it sprawled into a protracted trial. But Ava, sitting across from Quinn in his office, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, saw beyond the money. Her eyes burned with a quiet fire as she insisted on more than financial recompense. She demanded structural reforms, rigorous oversight of police conduct, mandatory reporting of every encounter, comprehensive diversity training to uproot the biases that had ensnared her. And then, in a stroke of inspiration born from her own struggles, she proposed a scholarship program for underrepresented students, pursuing careers in criminal justice or law, a legacy of hope rising from her ashes. The city officials balked, their lips tightening at her audacity. But as more sordid details leaked, tales of coercion, falsified reports, and silenced complaints, her resistance crumbled beneath the weight of public fury. The final settlement was a triumph, a landmark etched in ink and resolve. Ava would receive a hefty payout, enough to breathe easy for years to come. But the true victory lay in the city's commitment to change. New regulations would bind the police department's hands, forcing transparency where shadows once reigned. And at Harvard, an annual scholarship would bear her name, the Watson Scholarship for Justice and Reform, offering tuition and mentorship to minority students determined to reshape a flawed system. Ava stood in her apartment, a modest space filled with books and dreams, staring at a letter confirming the agreement. A smile tugged at her lips, a rare moment of lightness piercing the weight she carried. Meanwhile, Flannery and Sullivan faced their own day of judgment. The courtroom was a cavern of anticipation, its wooden benches packed with onlookers. The two officers sat stiffly, their uniforms replaced by ill-fitting suits, their eyes boring into Ava with a bitterness that once might have chilled her. Now, it was the hollow glare of men stripped of their power, caught in the snare of their own making. The trial unfolded like a slow storm, testimonies piling up, evidence stacking against the muddle. The jury returned after a mere day of deliberation, Guilty. The word landed like a gavel strike, echoing through the silent room. The judge, his voice steady and grave, sentenced them to years in federal prison, their futures dissolving behind bars. Ava watched, her chest tight with a satisfaction that bordered on sorrow. This was justice. Raw and unadorned karma's heavy hand delivering what their arrogance had earned. In the months that followed, Ava reclaimed her life piece by piece. She threw herself into her studies at Harvard, her pen scratching across notebooks late into the night, her resolve unshaken by the trauma that lingered like a shadow. The media frenzy faded, replaced by fresher scandals, but the ripples of her case endured. The scholarship program blossomed, its recipients a vibrant tapestry of ambition, young men and women from marginalized corners of the city, their eyes alight with purpose. Ava met them at dinners and panels, her heart swelling as they shared their plans to dismantle inequity brick by brick. With her settlement funds, she paid off her tuition and seeded a small foundation, partnering with grassroots groups in Boston and Atlanta to fund workshops on civil rights and police accountability. She stepped into lecture halls at Harvard Law, her voice steady as she recounted her story not as a victim, but as a warrior who had turned pain into power. Graduation day dawned bright and crisp, the Harvard yard alive with the rustle of gowns and the murmur of proud families. Ava adjusted her cap, her fingers brushing the tassel, and thought of that terrified girl on the sidewalk shivering, broken, yet unbroken. Her parents enveloped her in a tearful embrace, her mother's sobs a melody of relief and joy. Friends Sonali, Daniel, Amelia cheered raucously as she crossed the stage, her diploma a hard-won prize. In her commencement speech, she stood before a sea of faces, her words ringing with conviction. She spoke of the night that nearly destroyed her, of the community that lifted her up, of the duty to confront injustice with unrelenting courage. The applause thundered, a chorus of affirmation, as she stepped into a future she had fought to claim. Years later, Ava's name graced headlines once more. A Boston news outlet heralded her as a rising star, a Harvard grad and civil rights advocate now running for the Massachusetts State Senate. At her announcement, she stood outside the State House, the wind tugging at her coat, supporters cheering as she painted a vision of equity and compassion. Quinn watched from the crowd, his chest swelling with pride for the woman who had once trembled in his office, now a force of nature. Flannery and Sullivan festered in prison, their appeals exhausted, their bitterness a poison they could not escape. The Cambridge Police Department, reshaped by reforms and new leadership, grappled with its past, while the Watson Scholarship churned out dreamers who carried Ava's torch. Late at night, in her quiet Boston apartment, Ava sometimes revisited those harrowing moments, the cold cell, the sting of metal, the despair that clawed at her soul. But then she'd think of the thousands who had stood with her, the momentum of truth, the promise she'd forged in the crucible of her suffering, to fight, always, for what was right. That fire burned within her, guiding her beyond courtrooms and podiums into a world where justice, though imperfect, could be forged anew by those bold enough to demand it. Her story was a clarion call reminder that corruption's consequences are inevitable, that power abused will crumble, and that one voice, resolute and fearless, can ignite a movement that echoes far beyond the shadows.